Hello my dears, before we begin, quick content warning for eugenics, abuse, ABA, shock therapy, discrimination, hatred, and everything else Autism Speak stands for. Yes, we're going for this overly sarcastic tone so we can avoid the horrifying reality of how disgustingly terrible this whole thing truly is. Yay. So if you have existed on this planet and heard of the word autism, you've seen the puzzle piece. First thing to mention is that this puzzle piece does not equate with autism. None of the various Autism Speaks logos do. But before we can get into that, we need to understand what Autism Speaks is. So we're going to start with an allegory from an educational Instagram account called the Autistic Park Ranger, which you should definitely follow. I will include a link to the account in the description. Pride this year in all cities is run by the most homophobic man on the planet. Not only does he want to rid the world of the LGBTQ plague, but also he is the primary funder for research into a cure. He actively profits off of conversion therapy and approves of the use of electric shock to punish the sufferers of this gay curse. He creates large marketing campaigns that declare the gay disease is coming for your children and will replace them with demons. The parade this year bans all LGBTQ voices from participating. All messaging must go through his PR department. The rainbow flag is ignored and replaced with a white flag with a pink triangle in the center. He does not want anyone to remember that he created Pride Month and invented the parade idea. That sounds horrible, doesn't it? I mean, just absolutely disgusting. And not only is this man not LGBT, he funds torture for LGBT people, silences their voices, and calls himself the leading representation for the LGBT community, while promoting fear and hatred. You would want nothing more than to get rid of him and let the LGBTQ+ community take charge. Thankfully, that isn't real. But Autism Speaks is, and it's the same thing, just for autism. Autism Speaks does not have any autistic people in its leadership and systematically excludes them, with the only one ever hired resigning in protest. 23 of their 25 current board members represent corporate interests. They, on average, raise about $95 million a year, with 90% of that budget going to research, advertising, and fundraising. Less than 4% goes to autistic people and their families. Because of this, you will often find people spelling Autism Speaks with a $ for the S. Now you might be thinking, well, at least they're raising awareness with advertising. To which I would point you to their infamous I Am Autism ad campaign of 2009. And here are some of my favorite quotes from those advertisements, which aired on major TV networks. I work faster than pediatric AIDS, cancer, and diabetes combined. If you're happily married, I will make sure that your marriage fails. Your money will fall into my hands and I will bankrupt you for my own self-gain. I will fight to take away your hope. I will plot to rob you of your children and your dreams. I will make sure that every day you wake up and cry. And one of the advertisements included a mother saying that she contemplated driving off of a bridge with her autistic child and then only didn't because she had a neurotypical child. They also promoted the proven myth that vaccines cause autism and supported lots of other pseudoscientific things to fearmonger. Oh, and in 2017, Autism Speaks partnered with a white supremacist group in Ontario for a thing. They also actively support the Judge Rotenberg Center, which is a school and residential facility that up until 2020 used electric shock on its patients and had been deemed by the UN to be torturous. Autism Speaks also strongly advocates for parents to send their autistic children to ABA therapy, saying it is the only hope for your child. We're going to talk more about this in depth next week, but for now, ABA is essentially conversion therapy and it's used to train a child to act neurotypical, and it's widely accepted as abuse by the autistic community. It's connected with increased risk of PTSD, depression, and suicide in autistic adults. Autism Speaks is also the main funder for research looking into causes, preventions, treatments, and cures for autism. They are advocating for the creation of a prenatal test for autism so mothers can choose to abort their autistic babies. And, unsurprisingly, they talk about the hardships of this disorder, how autism is an urgent global health crisis, and how it is their firm belief that, working together, we will find the missing pieces of the puzzle. And that's where our old friend the puzzle piece comes back into the equation. It's the symbol people think of when they think autism, but it implies that we're a mystery that needs to be solved, an incomplete being. It also implies that we don't see the bigger picture, which, though we do often focus on specific pieces and details of things, that doesn't mean we can't see the bigger picture. It also implies that only children are diagnosed with autism and that autistic adults simply don't exist, or that we're permanently children. It also used to be blue to signify that autism is most common in boys, but they've since changed it to this to be more gender inclusive, which... okay. Anyway, some people are trying to reclaim the puzzle piece, but most autistic people have such a viscerally negative reaction to it that it's not going too well, and we prefer to use this symbol instead, which represents neurodiversity. Now by this point, you're probably thinking about this whole situation. I want to give a special shout out to this graphic right here, because it says, "I am his voice, he is my heart." Does that make anyone else feel super uncomfy? Because it should. This, my dears, is the stereotype of the autism mom. You know, the neurotypical parent of an autistic child who then makes their whole identity centered around being the parent to an autistic child. The one who has puzzle piece t-shirts and stickers absolutely everywhere and goes to every single walk for the cure. Now, I found discussions about autism moms and autism dads to be very difficult because people often accuse us of being anti-parents of autistic kids, and that is far from the truth. We would love for you to ask questions and learn about your kid's diagnosis. We absolutely welcome it. I love seeing parents learning to accept their kid for who they are. But please, please, for the love of goodness, do not make your child's diagnosis about you. Now, autism culture has changed a lot in a short period of time. So just 10 or 15 years ago, calling yourself an autism parent was a radical acceptance of something rarely talked about. But at the same time, language is changing, and this phraseology makes it seem like you are the caregiver and your child is a burden, which is not great. And I know that the reasoning behind it is around love for a child. You love them and you want what's best for them and you want to advocate for them, and I love that. The energy is just awesome, but it usually ends up in situations where the parent is advocating by speaking over or talking for their child rather than listening to them. And it leads to talk about your child being your number one everyday inspiration as if it's their job to make you feel good about yourself. And it's people speaking over autistic voices that lead hate groups like Autism Speaks to thrive. A great example of this kind of mom is Elsa from Atypical, which is a show that we're going to talk about at some point. But her entire identity is around being Sam's mom. She coddles him, she doesn't let him be independent, and she makes his autism about her. She spends most of her time trying to find different therapies for her son, even though he doesn't want to do them. She goes to support groups with other autism moms where they talk about how difficult their lives are now because of their autistic child. They grieve the loss of their child's perfect futures, which they apparently cannot have because they are autistic. And look, parenting a kid isn't easy. And parenting an autistic kid has its own unique challenges, and it's okay to wish that it were different sometimes. But it's not productive to dwell on it. And you're not defined by your child's diagnosis. If your child has migraines, you wouldn't call yourself a migraine mom. If you adopted your kid from Russia, you wouldn't call yourself a Russian family. Who you are and who your child is are two very different things. Anyway, if you want to support autistic-run educational and support organizations, please check out the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network and the Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network, and I'd love if you supported them instead. I will include links to their websites in the description. I also want to remind you that it's okay if you've supported Autism Speaks or sported a puzzle piece before because you didn't know. I used to have a puzzle piece skirt that I made myself, so just remember that guilt gets you nowhere. Be proud that you are learning and spend your energy on how you can make change in the future. Anyway, thank you for watching this weirdly peppy video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.